think of ourselves as the most powerful beings in the universe, it's unsettling to discover that we're wrong. Time has come to see the world as it is.
Can we pull back the veil of static and reach into the source of all being? Behind this curtain lies this random pattern generator. You will be responsible for an escalation that will destroy everything.
In this episode, I want to recommend 3 other podcasts that I listen to which deal with the paranormal and strange. First off is The Unexplained, hosted by longtime British news luminary Howard Hughes. He has a great classic booming English voice, a very warm and sincere attitude, and the relentless and determined approach of the inveterate journalist that he is. He is very polite and accommodating to his guests, even when he is obviously ripping holes in their arguments. He has quite a few very believable and intelligent guests, including very respectable people like Guy Lyon Playfair, Stanton Friedman, and Graham Hancock, though a problem I have with the show is that he will often host guests who are alarmist fearmongers just trying to push a book. It's usually obvious that he doesn't believe their doomsaying, but I don't like listening to anyone who seems hell-bent on making people terrified about unproven things which they wouldn't be able to do anything about anyway. The next one I want to mention is Strange Familiars with Timothy Renner. In this excellent show, Renner speaks one-on-one and in-depth with mostly other natives of Pennsylvania who have had paranormal experiences. He also treks into areas of the wilderness known for strange activity with other investigators to record their possibly paranormal experiences firsthand and in the moment. Renner is very knowledgeable of the subject and is particularly well-versed on all matters Bigfoot. I've actually learned more about Bigfoot phenomenon from this show than I have from everything else I've ever read or seen on the subject. It's also a nice bonus that Renner has had his own experiences and is also quite familiar with Western occult knowledge. He is definitely not a naive materialist desperately struggling to find conventional explanations for everything paranormal. The final one I want to mention has a very similar name to Howard Hughes' The Unexplained. It is called Unexplained, with Richard McClane Smith. This one is, again, a different format than the previous 2. Richard McClane Smith does extensive, in-depth research into a specific mysterious event, rewrites it in a compelling storytelling by the campfire style, and reads it on the air in a gentle Northern English accent. His recounting of the tragic and mysterious events of the Dyatlov Pass incident is the best and most extensive account on the events I have ever heard or read. And I should add that Unexplained with Richard McClane Smith is what inspired me to create this podcast which you are listening to right now. And now, the news.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
Something is up in Navajo County, Arizona. At least that's what it looks like to the neighbors of this small community in east central Arizona. Book author and Bigfoot researcher Mitchell Wade says that strange things are happening, but their cameras are not being able to capture these events due to electronic failure. The cameras only record for a few seconds. It's not going to the SD card, Wade explains as he frustratedly tries to videotape the big claw-like marks and splatter on the shiny wall of a trailer. What the heck is going on here, he wonders. But the equipment failures are just the beginning. Power outages, missing pets, strange lights, UFOs, and giant jackrabbits appear to be common features of this arid landscape. Neighbors are complaining about strange noises, growls, and barefoot human-like prints, researcher says. I hear this trailer has been doing weird things. A black and white house cat has disappeared. Notice how the window cover has been broken on the right edge. Were you looking for any kind of damage that wasn't there before? The Mogollon monster, a Bigfoot-like creature purported to live in the Mogollon Rim of Arizona, has been Wade's subject of study for decades. He is part of the Mogollon Monster website, an online platform that his research team has been using to document their findings since 2007. Our mission is to study the Mogollon Monster. We study numbers, birth rates, social structure, diets, and why Bigfoot does what Bigfoot does. Reportedly, Wade and his team spotted the giant jackrabbit, but claimed that when they attempted to capture it on video, the camera malfunctioned unexpectedly. The rabbit was sitting near the water tower, he said. It was watching me, sat on its hind legs with ears up. This lagomorph creature, he claims, has been spotted by several witnesses in the past. Biggest jackrabbit I've ever seen, he said. Should we add Skinwalker to our list of strange things at this trailer? A street camera captured what some viewers dubbed a giant ghost jaywalking in the streets of New Orleans. The video was reportedly sent to YouTube user Mr. Enigma last week by Jackson, a viewer from the city who realized the anomaly on an EarthCam livestream. The camera is located on Bourbon Street, the oldest neighborhood in New Orleans, extending 13 blocks from Canal Street to Esplanade Avenue and flooded with bars and strip clubs. It is not clear when the oddity originally took place. As you can see here, the giant figure appears to walk across the street before fading out seconds later, Mr. Enigma said. At first, it looks like the strange occurrence could have been easily doctored, but according to the YouTuber, two people walking nearby appear to notice this shadow-like being. The older gentleman notices it and alerts his friend, he explains. Seconds later, he says the rest of the crowd are glued into what has just happened. The Espanola Police Department in New Mexico released footage Thursday containing what looks like a ghost walking across the lot in the Sally Port in the back of the police station. Public safety aide Carl Romero was waiting for an inmate to be brought in the holding facility when he noticed the anomaly on the screen. At first I thought it was a polilla, like a fly, a moth. Then I saw the legs and it was a human, Romero told local news reporter Nancy Laughlin. But not a real human, it was a ghost, he added. The video shows a blurry human-like silhouette seemingly making its way through the Sally Port chain-link fence, then walking across the middle of the Sally Port before crossing the chain-link fence again. You can see it walk through. It walks in the direction of the old transport cages, and there is not really any way for it to get out through there. But it seems to walk right through that, Romero's supervisor, Detective Solomon Romero, explained. A lot of Romeros there. The detective also confessed that other officers have reported paranormal incidents recently. They have felt what appears to be someone breathing down their neck as they are working on reports in the briefing room. Detective Romero says this was not a technical glitch. Additional officers confirmed that strange noises and similar apparitions also happen to be common inside the station. The Espanola police station has been at that location since 2006. According to the department, there have been unsolved murders near the building. For years we have heard and even seen him or her around the building, but now we finally have proof on camera. YouTube user FF Galvan, who claims to work for the same police department, said about the uploaded footage. According to Galvan, they recorded approximately 10 shots at different angles and zooms. We captured the actual swag of his or her walk and the separating of the legs, he said. It's amazing. So happy we finally got it on camera. At Riverside, California, on August 22, 1955, at 2 in the afternoon, a group of children, ages 4 to 15, were playing in the yard of the Douglas family. While Kermit Douglas and another boy were wrestling, Kermit noticed a half-sun-like object in the air above them. After this object disappeared, a hovering silver disc appeared. Soon the other children noticed this object and others, semi-transparent, like it, appearing and disappearing with a musical ping. What at first seemed like fun began to frighten the children. One of the objects, which bore a bright source of light on its antenna, landed in a field not far from them. The children saw a 3.5-foot tall being emerge from the craft. It had a big red mouth, big red eyes, and 4 diamond-shaped things where his nose should be. When a 7-year-old boy started walking toward the object, 2 of the older boys tripped him up and prevented him from getting any closer. 2 boys also saw a transparent being about the size of a 4-year-old child in front of the house next door. The creature also had those diamond-like spots on its face. The boys insisted that the creature was not standing on the ground but hovering above it. Another boy reported seeing an arm suspended in the air about 20 feet away and beckoning to him. The strangest creature supposedly spoke to one of the boys. This being was solid-looking and wore satin-like clothing. Oddly enough, it had not only 4 legs, but also an extraordinary doubling of the forearms. 2 forearms emerged at each elbow, one up, the other down. The creature told the boy to climb into a nearby tree, where they would pick him up in 15 minutes. When he and another boy climbed the tree, the other children forced them down using a garden hose. A few minutes later, a bright craft flew around this particular tree, then disappeared. The investigators felt that the children who were frightened long afterward told the truth, whatever that may be. On October 14, 1954, at 06:30 hours, in Shamsabad, Iran, a man coming out of his house saw a luminous object resembling a bright star. Coming near, he observed it was an object 5 meters long, near which a short young man was standing on a circular piece of metal, laughing at the witness's terrified expression. The witness was 20 meters away when the craft took off at unbelievable speed. On October 14, 1954, at 15:30 hours, in Loulard, France, in Urchin Wood, Casimir Storowski, a miner, met a strange being of small height and bulky figure with large slanted eyes. Its body was covered with fur. On October 14, 1954, at 18:15 hours, in Bio, France, a municipal employee, Jose Casella, was riding home when he suddenly found in front of him on the road an oval-shaped aluminum object about 5.5 meters in diameter, 1 meter high. As he applied the brakes, the object took off at very high speed. Several persons confirmed the sighting. The disc was gray, supported a dome, and emitted a soft whistle. It took off when Casella was only 6 meters away. On October 14, 1954, at nightfall in Anglaise, France, a farmer saw a bright object which came almost to the ground. When he tried to approach it, the object produced an intense screen of light and vanished without a noise. Several persons in Anglaise observed the scene. On October 14, 1954, at nightfall, in Méruel, France, a farmer observed an orange sphere land and went near it. He found it was shaped like a flattened dome, 5.5 meters in diameter, and gave off blinding light, which illuminated the countryside for about 200 meters. It was transparent, and a dark figure could be seen inside. After remaining at ground level for 10 minutes, it flew north, while a bright cloud slowly fell to the ground at the site. When the witness arrived home, he found his clothes covered with a white film of adhesive substance not unlike paraffin wax. Now moving to strange events in Portugal. In Almaceda, near Castelo Branco, 4 people saw UFO land from which emerged 2 entities in shining clothing. They gathered flowers, shrubs, and twigs in shiny box before re-entering craft and tried to invite witnesses on board. 24th September 1954. In Colmeada, suburb of Coimbra, poltergeist outbreak with loud blows and other noises, physical assault, and a baby removed from its cradle to a table, early October 1909. In Criaco do Cambrito, Azores, watchmen at air station saw oval UFO with glass tower and balustrade where 2 entities stood. 2 others were in the tower. Witness shown a light at UFO and he was covered in cloud of dust. UFO vanished and witness fainted, 1st February 1968. In Puerto La Cruz, tanker crew saw cigar-shaped UFO fly up out of the sea, 6 July 1965. Santa Maria Airport, Azores, guard saw UFO land, entity came out and talked to him but was not understood, 20th September 1954. Now in Puerto Rico, at El Yunque Mountain, 9 people were on the mountain at night in search of UFOs and saw 4 entities 5 to 6 feet tall with long arms, big eyes, pointed noses, and ears. One carried a little machine with lights on it, and they all moved by leaping. 20th October to 21st October 1973. In the Mocha area, mysterious deaths of animals, especially domestic ducks, geese, and rabbits, also goats. UFO sighting in same area, February to July 1975. In Cuebra Diaz, small entity dressed in green with helmet seen. It also had a tail. Red and blue lights on a box on its back lit up and entity flew away. Witnesses watched the lights among the trees, and they were joined by another set of lights as if another entity was there. 12th July 1977. Now moving to Reunion, near Arecibo, Arab merchant gave lift to phantom hitchhiker, 20th November 1982. In Petite Ile, man saw UFO come up out of the sea and fly away. 10th February 1975. In Plan des Chaffres, farmer saw oval UFO just above ground and 15 feet in diameter. 2 small entities stood in object. It vanished in a flash and a blast of hot air. 30th July 1968. In St. Pierre, girls' clothes caught fire and flats were burnt. February 1983.
What the hell in God's name is going down here?
That was a public service announcement designed to scare the shit out of you.
He was abducted by aliens earlier this afternoon.
That little girl got lost under the bed and she went into an alternate dimension.
I'm going to read another selection from My Life with the Spirits by Lon Milo DuQuette. Of all the Enochian and elemental spirits we contacted during the 3-year heyday of the Guild of Enochian Studies, or GOES, one in particular became the object of repeated and concentrated workings. The spirit is EHNB, the ruling entity of the small but immensely powerful Tablet of Union, or Spirit Tablet. The Tablet of Union is the key to the Enochian elemental system, just as the quintessential element, spirit, is the key to the elemental universe. Spirit is the glue that binds the other 4 elements together to form the building blocks of creation. It is also the barrier that prevents the elements from dissolving into one another and turning the universe into mush. Spirit is always pushing and pulling at the same time. This dual role is expressed in elemental magic as 2 pentagrams, spirit active and spirit passive. The Enochian Tablet of Union is actually a simplified and macrocosmic rendition of the 4 elemental tablets. It is made up of the names of the 4 great spirits of the elements. EXARP, Great Spirit of Air, who rules the entire elemental tablet of air. HCOMA, who rules the entire elemental tablet of water. NANTA, who rules the entire elemental tablet of earth, and BITOM, who rules the entire elemental tablet of fire. These 4 great spirits rule the entire elemental universe, and the spirit represented by the first letter of each of their names, EHNB, rules the 4 great spirits. Any way you look at it, EHNB is one big spirit in the Enochian system. One side of each of the 4 pyramids of its name is attributed to an element, E, air, H, water, and earth, B, fire. The remaining 3 sides are pure spirit. In other words, the elemental structure of EHNB is a powerful yet balanced mixture of 12 parts spirit, 1 part air, 1 part water, 1 part earth, and 1 part fire. As a group, we avoided the Tablet of Union for nearly a year because of a comment made by Lester Crowley in his book of Thoth. Generally speaking, the attributions of spirit are not clear and simple like those of the other elements. It is very remarkable that the Tablet of Spirit in the Enochian system is the key to all mischief, as in the Hindu system, Akasha is the egg of darkness. He doesn't go on to explain what he means by the key to all mischief, but it was enough to keep us away from working the Tablet of Union for a very long time. When we finally got up the nerve to do it, we were most pleasantly surprised. Fearing mischief, David and I decided to first do it privately a day or so before class. First of all, EHNB is extremely easy to call forth. The temple opening ceremony is very brief, and only the first and second calls are intoned. David immediately described a circular temple setting with circular well in the center of the floor and a dome ceiling with a circular hole in the top. EHNB in humanoid form, and dressed rather ostentatiously, wearing an enormous ring, stood near the well. I began with the same question I had asked all the Enochian spirits upon their appearance. What is the nature of your being? It did not answer verbally, but stretched forth its hand, and, with its finger, pointed to the circumference of the temple floor. David interpreted, its nature is universal. What are its specific duties? David answered in the first person. The mechanism of the universe you understand or can ever understand is contained within me. I am everything, I do everything, I know everything. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to ask. Finally, I asked David what EHNB was doing now. Just standing by the well looking bored. I wanted time to think. EHNB was more than I was prepared for. I asked David to thank it for coming and ask it if it would readily appear again for other members of the class if we called it in the same manner. It agreed. We then bade it farewell and closed the temple. At the next class, David and I did not share the EHNB story with the others. Instead, I asked another class member if she would be willing to scry a spirit from the Tablet of Union. Our volunteer was not as skilled as David, nor was she possessed with his rich vocabulary of visual images. Nevertheless, EHNB appeared to her, standing before a circular campfire surrounded by a circle of stones. He wore a fringed leather coat and fringed pants. I asked her if she had anything she wished to ask EHNB. She declined, feeling almost intimidated by its presence. After I banished and closed, David and I related the story of our first EHNB encounter with the other members of the class. Everyone was struck by the similarities of the two visions. We decided for the time being that EHNB would be the focus of our elemental workings. In the months and years that followed, EHNB proved without question to be the most cooperative and informative spirit in the Enochian elemental system. In my opinion, it is the classic spirit guide. One evening, while questioning it on the nature of time, I asked if it was aware of the periods of life and consciousness that we humans view as incarnations. EHNB answered in the affirmative. I then asked if it could show us visions of our previous incarnations. Again, the answer was yes. Then show me one of mine, I foolishly asked. Show me how I die. The seer began to describe an urban scene of what appeared to be a city in the Near East. A young man with a bushy mustache was on the rooftop of a building about 2 or 3 stories high. Telegraph poles and lines were in view, telling us that we were no farther back in time than the mid-19th century. There was laughter. The young man stepped to the edge of the roof and put his foot on a wire that stretched over the street to another building. He fell, he died, the end. That being said, I will remind you that as an infant I had many memories that could be interpreted as stemming from previous incarnations. I confess not one of them, to my recollection, had the remotest semblance to the one described by EHNB on that evening. Be that as it may, in my first year of college I volunteered to be the subject in the study of hypnotic age regression. This information was not known to the seer. I was hypnotized by a licensed and experienced hypnotherapist and regressed past infancy to the last moment of a theorized previous incarnation. I was a young man. I had a thick black mustache that I could easily see when I lowered my eyes. I was dressed in loose white pants and a white shirt that was open to my navel. I was on a rooftop looking across to a building of the same height across the street. A wire joined the 2 buildings. Motivated by a wire-walking act I had recently seen, and urged on by my mischievous friends, I picked up a length of pipe to use as my balancing pole and stepped onto the wire. I fell, I died, the end. As I mentioned before, the Guild of Enochian Studies met twice a week for nearly 3 years. The lodge grew surprisingly fast and put increasing demands upon my time. Even though I have not resurrected the GOES per se, I still make Enochian scrying sessions part of my regular magic class and encourage even beginning students to learn the basics and start a personal program of exploration. Today, scholarship on Enochian magic is greater than at any other time in history. Aspects of the system that our little class never even approached are currently the subject of thorough examination and lively discussion. I am thrilled at the conversations I follow on the Enochian chat lines, and am gratified to see that a new generation of brilliant Enochian magicians is giving this marvelous system the attention it deserves. My personal Enochian work for the last 10 years has for the most part been limited to my repeated exploration of the 30 Enochian heavens, or aethers. Instead of classifying the material and celestial universes and the levels of human consciousness in terms of 10 Sephiroth and 22 paths of the Kabbalistic diagram called the Tree of Life, Enochian magic sees the world arranged a little differently. Surrounding the 4 elemental tablets, or watchtowers, that form the matter and energies of the phenomenal universe, there are 30 spherical aethers, one enveloping another like the layers of an onion. Like the paths in Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, each aether is reflected in the software of the human consciousness matrix. The Kabbalistic magician engages in a program of path workings and systematically explores the paths and Sephiroth of the Tree of Life in scrying sessions. It is common, even for beginners, to obtain some visions in all levels of the tree, but to those who are truthful with themselves, it is always obvious when they have reached a level where their current level of initiation, the highest level of consciousness they can currently achieve, prevents them from obtaining an undistorted vision of that plane. The Enochian magician explores the 30 aethers in precisely the same manner. Over the years, I have systematically scryed all 30 aethers half a dozen times. Each time starts out very strong, the early aethers clear and full of useful information and insights. Then, inevitably, there comes a point where the vision is seen as through a glass darkly. The messages are jumbled and cryptic, the angelic governors unstable and crabby. It is then that I know that I have reached the limit of my personal level of initiation. I must do something with myself and to myself to break through to the next higher level of consciousness. More often than not, I find that the key to achieving the next level is to be found in my own diary, in the notes from the last aether I could successfully penetrate. I confess I still don't get very far before I hit the glass darkly stage. Nevertheless, I feel that by periodically visiting the aethers, no matter how distorted most of them may be, a magician can gain real insight as to his or her personal spiritual progress. Furthermore, unlike Kabbalistic path workings that are often jump-started by guided imagery exercises telling the seer what they should be seeing at any given point, quote, "In Hod you will meet a man in an orange cloak eating fish sticks with his toes." The Enochian seer is obliged to view visions that are entirely unique to his or her vocabulary of images.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
I'm going to read another selection from the book Cosmic Voyage by Courtney Brown. One of the essential goals of my research has been to understand early Grey civilization. I wanted to know about their home world, the major events that have occurred in their history, and the more important challenges that they have faced as a culture. This chapter presents the data from 3 separate remote viewing sessions. The first is a monitored and blind session, Type 4 data, in which the cue was Grey's early civilization. The second and third sessions were done solo under Type 1 settings. The second session on which I report was actually conducted first chronologically, approximately 6 months before my monitor finally worked the blind session. The preliminaries indicated a composite target with dry land, a body of liquid, and artificial structures. I am getting colors of blue and black. The textures are wet and splashy. The temperatures are cool and the tastes are salty. The smells are fishy and I hear sounds of splashing. I have some sort of structure on a flat surface. I am drawing this now on my stage 3 sketch. The surface seems to be wet, like a body of water. The structure is hard. The monitor gives me a movement exercise that places me on top of the structure. There is a lot of spiraling energetics below the structure, like a funnel of some sort. I draw another stage 3 sketch of a structure on the surface of a body of water. Below the structure is a large vortex of spiraling water like a huge whirlpool. The water around the structure outside of the vortex is very turbulent. Courtney, move on to stage 4. Okay, I'm there now in the matrix. I definitely have a vortex of some sort. There's plenty of water and a lot of power involved in this site. There are beings as well. I get the sense that this is a job environment for them. Moving in on the vortex, there is tremendous energy connected with a huge volume of water here. The vortex is sucking downward. The beings are humanoid, very advanced. I am moving in on the structure now. The thing is some kind of ET thing, perhaps a ship, but not necessarily a spaceship. Shifting back to the beings, their job is environmental and it deals with oceans. There is something here about fish diversity in connection with the ocean habitat. The ideas of saving, preserving, preparing for some change. There is something here connected with the concern for destructiveness in the habitat. I'm in the structure now, looking at the inside of the thing. There are computer or control panels here, not so advanced or complicated as other ET spaceships that I have seen. It seems like the inside of this ship is a hospital and sterile environment for the humanoid beings. There is a clean smell here. I'm moving in on the beings again. They are definitely humanoid. Getting closer. They are of the gray type, but something is weird here. The eyes are not so big, but these are definitely grays. Their eyes are sunken as well. These folks seem to have noticed me now. They also seem a bit surprised with my appearance here. This is unusual. I have never surprised a gray before. I get the idea that they are respectful of my visit and have just now been told by superiors, or actually someone to whom they defer, to cooperate with me. What can you tell me about their clothing? Are they wearing anything? They have uniforms on. They even have an insignia on the uniforms. I'm sketching it now. Huh. It's the same thing that I saw in the uniforms of the Greys who rescued the Martians on Mars. The heart-shaped thing with a snake thing inside. The insignia is theirs. It is the symbol for their unit or core. I'm entering their minds now. I get a sort of blank, like my understanding does not exactly match theirs. But it is not so strong a blank as I have had with other Greys. See if you can get information from them about where they are now. Doing that now. The question is locational data, and they are initially concerned about this. They seem disturbed that there could be some confusion and perhaps worry with this information. I am not pressing it, but I get the sense I might be able to. This is not Earth, however. My monitor has me execute a movement exercise that places me at the home port of the ship. I have a city type of setting with an open area in front of it from my current perspective. There are buildings here, polished and smooth. Many of the buildings are pointy at the top, like spires. The smell of the place is pungent, sooty. I'm getting the strong AOL that this is the Grey homeworld. Courtney, from this perspective, probe the meaning of the insignia on the uniforms. It represents the symbol of a rescue corps. There is some type of disaster, calamity taking place, and that unit is acting to save something. I'm getting the clear sense that the particular unit or corps had its origin in the period of collapse of the early Grey civilization. Probe the concept of collapse. Hold on. I'm getting the smell of burning, pungent, sooty, stinky. There is tremendous environmental waste involved here. What about the leadership? This Grey society has a very selfish orientation. The collective society institutionalized the drive for greed. The idea is to accept as normal the individuals taking whatever is desired and not caring for the overall good. I'm getting a weird AOL. I am AOLing something like a rebellion in subspace. I'm going to put this down as similar to the Lucifer Rebellion. I have to put that down as coming from the signal line. Side note. Some remote viewers have obtained data that suggests that Lucifer and Satan are, or perhaps were, two real and separate personalities involved in a subspace war that did not turn out well for them. Early mystics apparently perceived some of these events and included references to this war in their writings, which were later incorporated into religious beliefs. Just put it down, don't try to interpret anything, move on, continue to probe the concept of calamity, rescue, recovery. The Rescue Corps is mobilized from within the society. They are the ones who came up with the insignia. Hold on, something is changing. I am now in direct contact with a particular Grey, whose job is to help me understand what is happening. This Grey seems like the normal ones, in other words, with the big wraparound eyes. I'm getting the sense that this Grey thinks that I have been a bit confused in this session, and it is necessary for the Greys to clarify things that are important. I am back viewing the buildings. I am drawing a better sketch of the place now. Following the signal, I am moving in on the concept of environmental collapse. There is total pollution here. Literally, these beings are swimming in their own feces. Their entire consciousness is oriented towards self-gratification. I'm probing the concept of sex now. It seems that these folks are extremely sexually motivated. Moving on to food, their food is mass-produced. There are many individuals to feed, literally billions. Over time, the food became highly processed and very far from a natural design. The source of food was the oceans originally. I get the idea that these folks eat fish. Again, following the signal, I sense that these beings were corrupted by some type of subspace war. It's as if they were collectively seduced by an arrogant, rebellious, and very powerful leader. They later felt betrayed, but the damage was too far gone. They had to recover from scratch. Okay, Courtney, let's end the session. And the target was Grey's early civilization. The data presented above were corroborated by a solo session, Type 1 data, that I conducted and recorded half a year earlier on December 3rd, 1983. In that earlier session, I perceived a very congested and highly polluted city. The atmosphere on the Grey homeworld seemed harsh, perhaps caustic by Earth standards, and this harshness was not natural. With regard to the Greys themselves, I also perceived some of the vocal expressions of the early Greys. Their voices made curious chirping sounds. I also got the impression that the psychology of the Greys of that era had something in common with human psychology. The earlier Greys had smaller eyes than the Greys that are now active on and around Earth. Their skin was light-colored and smooth, and it wrinkled when touched. They had no hair that I perceive. In terms of sexuality, the early Greys had a highly focused sex drive, almost single-minded. In that earlier session, I also saw that the early Greys' babies were in trouble, sick as a consequence of pollution. Many deaths resulted from this. The Greys began having trouble reproducing. They gave birth, but with difficulty. They also did not have a clear idea of how much trouble they were in the sense that the early society was quite naive with regard to their dilemma, not unlike humans today. After the monitored session, I decided to hit the target a third time so that I could fill in some of the important details that seemed to be missing from both of the previous monitored and solo sessions. Thus, under Type 1 conditions, I targeted Grey's early civilization on June 20th, 1994. In the beginning of the session, I located the structure above the vortex in the ocean that I perceived in the monitored session. More detailed investigation revealed that this was a food production and maintenance facility. The vortex in the water was related to this activity. Focusing on the Greys in the structure, I noticed that their genitalia were quite small by human standards. Both males and females worked together in the structure in a seemingly egalitarian fashion. They had robust sexual lives, to say the least. Indeed, the quantity of their sexual activity seemed to dwarf that of humans, both in terms of the frequency of the act and the multiplicity of partners. Telepathy was more advanced among these beings than humans, and the sex act's telepathic component intensified the experience. In terms of the homeworld itself, I perceived that the atmosphere had been damaged. In addition to pollution, radiation bombarded the Greys at unhealthy levels. At this point of the solo session, I began probing the cause of the Greys' problems on their homeworld. It was clear that there was an evolutionary mistake of some sort. The focus on the self for self-gratification led to a behavioral dysfunction on the part of the vast majority of Greys. There seemed to be nothing that could counterbalance the drive for physical pleasure in their psyches. Following the signal further, I cued on the idea of spirituality. At this point, the session changed remarkably. I began to perceive a subspace light being. My sense was that this amorphous being was particularly powerful in some way unknown to me. Initially, I perceived both dark and light areas in it, and it did not seem benign. I then cued on the idea of external agents to the problems of the Greys, and I experienced a locational shift. I found myself overlooking what I can only describe as a layer of subspace life in which there were multitudes of subspace beings. In this layer of life, there was tremendous commotion, like a subspace version of Grand Central Station at rush hour Manhattan. The magnitude of the commotion and chaos in this layer of life was almost overwhelming. Probing on the relationship between these subspace beings and the Greys, I discerned that these subspace beings were the Greys before their birth in physical bodies. I detected an organizational structure among the subspace beings and, pursuing it, found they had a rigid and hierarchical social order. The control over their existence within this hierarchy was almost military in quality. They took orders and followed them. Strangely, they had been ordered to self-indulge and destroy, both in subspace and after physical birth. Following the signal further, I went after the leadership of the organization. I found myself in a subspace command and control center. The center had about 10 beings in it at the time. 4 or 5 of the beings seemed to be of a higher authority than the others. The internal aspect of the structure was arranged like an office building, and it became ever more apparent a rigid military structure prevailed here. I continued to follow the signal until I arrived at the one dominant leader of the organization. This being was the same amorphously shaped dark and light being that I had perceived earlier in the session. I entered its mind only to find that it had an extremely dark mind. Something was very wrong there. It was as if the being was psychologically ill. To begin with, it had a pathological fear of dying. It seemed to think that military fighting and conquest was needed in order to survive. It knew that mistakes had been made and it was afraid of punishment. The leader seemed unable to devise a plan for reconciliation. Fear prevented it. Then it became clear to me, this leader was a terrorist. Continuing the mind probe, the subspace terrorist leader was intent on destroying the Grey Homeworld. The aim was to instill fear in the other parts of the realm, and thus weaken the opposing forces. Fear was the key weapon. In words that best reflect the intent of the leader's mind, the Grey souls were being held as hostages during the crisis. The Dark Mind wanted a negotiated settlement that would establish its right of personality survival, but with changes. It wanted control over its own dominion. It wanted to establish itself as a sovereign, a dictator. Indeed, the leader desired worship of itself. Its need for worship was built into a weakness in its personality structure. It needed worship in order to assist its own flawed personality. In a weird way, the leader had a problem with low self-esteem. As I was making these observations, I felt the being shift its attention to me. It executed a time and locational shift to find me, then I felt it descend into my office like a dark subspace cloud surrounding me as I sat at my desk. To my considerable interest, I felt absolutely no fear of this being. I simply examined it and it examined me. It then departed after a few seconds of observation, perhaps 30 seconds, leaving the impression that it felt that I was a small fry being that was not directly threatening its activities or reign. In short, I was a pest. Apparently there was a subspace cause underlying the collapse of the Grey civilization. While I do not completely understand all of the events that led up to this collapse, I have no doubt that the Greys killed their homeworld. They then had to devise strategies to survive. Since their current physical appearance differs from that of their earlier period, I can only assume that their subsequent experiences were responsible for a considerable metamorphosis on their part. The growth in the sides of their eyes suggests that they began to live in a darker environment, perhaps underground, which makes sense given that the surface environment of their homeworld was in rapid decay. The present-day lack of sexual activity on the part of current Greys suggests that they genetically rid themselves of this physiological process. Indeed, it appears as if they genetically castrated themselves. The reason for this could be their need to control their own population size. However, it also implies that they developed alternative means of reproducing, perhaps using technological means to support fetus development. This idea closely corresponds with the reports of test tube babies and fetuses in liquid-filled incubators that consistently appear in the UFO abduction literature. In particular, see Mack 1994 and Jacobs 1992. Perhaps, though, another reason underlies the Greys' choice to rid themselves of their sexual function. It is not just that the Greys do not reproduce sexually anymore, they also do not have the psychological drive to engage in sexual activity. My own speculation is that their experiences during the collapse of their early civilization made them reevaluate the underlying causes of their dysfunctionality. They may have felt that their sexual drive helped lead them into their dilemma. The project of gene manipulation, initially intended to quickly adapt themselves to the new and harsher environment, may have extended more broadly into the sexual functioning of their minds as well. As a final point of interest, I note that some of my observations and analysis find correspondence, not corroboration but overlap, with ideas raised by Royal and Priest 1992, who based their research on what they claim is channeled data. Many questions remain with regard to the subject of the collapse of early Grey civilization. I do not know much about the rebel leader who seemed to be orchestrating the collapse. The collapse itself seems to have been an act of terrorism. But against whom was the rebel leader fighting? What mistakes were made that made the leader seek rebellion as a means of survival? It is also unclear as to exactly how the activity in subspace translated itself in the physical world. Humans have a very difficult time perceiving subspace activity, but early Grey physiology may have allowed a more transparent approach between the dimensions, and the corruption of physical life may have been easily accomplished on their homeworld. Finally, who were the beings who worked directly under the command of the rebel leader? They had humanoid form, but the rebel leader definitely did not. Previous research has indicated that subspace beings have some control over their appearance, whereas physical beings do not. Did the amorphous shape enhance the leader's ability to terrorize? I simply do not know the answers to these questions, but one thing is certain. The collapse of the early Grey civilization was not a simple process. There were both physical and subspace aspects, and for our own survival, we would be wise to learn from their mistakes in both dimensions.
Time has come to see the world as it is.
I'm going to continue reading the chapter Vine of the Dead from the book Supernatural by Graham Hancock. During my second session, I know things are going to be different when the opening parade of patterns and geometry gets overlaid with a lot of snakes, like a game of snakes and ladders. The snakes are very large, and their whole bodies from head to tail are clearly visible to me. The main colors are browns and yellows. I've been expecting them to show up. Reading around the subject before coming to the Amazon, I've learned that people from all parts of the world and many different cultures routinely meet snakes on the ayahuasca journey. The shamans say that this is because the spirit of ayahuasca, like the vine itself, takes snake form. In my vision, the snakes arrange themselves into patterns of interlaced wheels and spirals. Then they merge into one large mass and finally break apart into pairs of individuals that wind around each other like the DNA double helix. The nausea comes on strong and I'm out in the dark puking. The vomiting racks me to the core until I'm drenched from head to foot in sweat and have only dry heaves left. I sink to the ground on hands and knees, slump against one of the support poles of the hut, and then change my mind when I find myself face to face with a large poisonous spider. My head is cleared. I go back inside, take my place in the circle, and close my eyes. More snakes, a recurrence of the geometrical patterns. Then suddenly two beings made all of white light pop up in my face, one behind and to the side of the other. They are quite small, 3 or 4 feet tall, but I'm only aware of their upper bodies from the waist up. I don't see their feet. Their white light faces glow like neon and are approximately heart-shaped with big domed foreheads and narrow pointed chins. Nostrils and mouths, if they have them at all, are just slits in their otherwise smooth features. Their eyes are completely black and apparently without pupils. They seem to have business with me. They want to communicate. The communication or communication attempt feels telepathic, but somehow it is not getting through. I sense eagerness and frustration on their part. Then the nausea comes on again, really strong, and I'm outside for another protracted bout of vomiting and retching. Seated on a tree stump looking up at the stars, I have a strange sense of being possessed by the spirit of my father, as though he's inside me somehow, merged with me in my consciousness. On another night, the visions begin differently. After an initial bout of geometry and ladders, I find myself inside a building, a huge structure, a bit like the ancient Egyptian temple of Edfu at its entrance, but opening out into something quite other. Fantastic architecture on an extraordinary scale. I have a computer cam point of view and can fly around, zoom in, or zoom out anywhere. I fly up into a vast dome, examine the patterns of nested curves that decorate its ceiling. Then the vomiting takes me again and the visions are gone. Around the 5th night of my stay in the Amazon, I drink ayahuasca in a natural clearing in the jungle. The name given by the Indians to clearings like this is Supe Chakra, which means the Devil's Farm. 2 makeshift benches have been set up near the huge ancient fig tree, and we hang hammocks and mosquito nets at the edge of the clearing. Dark falls, surrounding us with the sounds of jungle night. We wait until around 8 p.m. to start the ceremony. I begin to vision very mildly after about 45 minutes, a dreamlike state enhanced by the weird luminous glow given off by thousands of dead leaves carpeting the forest floor. When my eyes are open, I see this real jungle with its glowing floor. When I close them, another jungle appears, a jungle of trees, stems, shoots, each traced with a line of fire and overcast with strangeness. I also see snakes again, not very large this time, but with wide open mouths. Then a tiny mannequin appears amongst the high jungle plants. It has the outline and size of a gingerbread man, but is glowing all neon white. It behaves like a puppet operated on strings by a puppeteer who is so far above us as to be out of sight. The mannequin dances through the tall trees. In the morning, Don Alberto, the shaman, says that the spirit of the chakra was with us, watching us the whole time, hiding behind the big fig tree. Apparently he was not happy that we vomited, and worse, in his chakra. But Don Alberto reassures us that he intervened on our behalf to make everything okay with this angry supernatural being. January 22nd. This night I go through what I've come to think of as the scrying mirror into the other world. I tolerate the ayahuasca well, and about 90 minutes pass before I vomit. In my strong hour of visions, I'm surrounded by intelligent plants which seem almost like animals, waving, weaving leaves, in dark colors but with their own fire. I then meet a big boa constrictor. Its head alone is about 2 feet long and a foot high. It allows me to stroke it, and I hear myself saying in my vision, "It's a beauty," or "You're a beauty," something like that. I see a yellow and black spotted butterfly, the size of a dinner plate, flitting from plant to plant in the hallucinatory jungle. I follow it until we reach a clearing where a second huge serpent awaits. There is no butterfly now, only this immense yellow and black serpent radiating sentience and magical force. Before my eyes, it spectacularly and mysteriously transforms into a powerful jaguar with yellow and black spots and confronts me face to face. There is a sort of telepathy. Then the creature abruptly turns away and vanishes. For what feels like a long while afterwards, I continue to sense its presence still out there, camouflaged against the otherworldly jungle plants. At no point do I feel afraid of it or threatened by it. Both it and the beautiful boa, the butterfly, even the plants, seem filled with vibrant energy and life and communicative intelligence. They also seem utterly and convincingly real, not stuff my brain is just perversely cooking up out of some hitherto unknown jungle scenes image bank in my temporal lobes, but real perceptions of real beings that ordinarily exist outside the range of my senses. The visions left me thinking, and the following morning I wrote in my notebook, "Matter and spirit, as above, so below. Science teaches us to believe that the material world is the primary and only reality." But from the ayahuasca perspective, this is absolutely not the case. What we call the material world, our consensual reality, is only part of the pattern, probably not even the primary part. Viewed through the lens of ayahuasca, another world becomes visible, another reality, perhaps many of them. And because these worlds interpenetrate our own, effects in this world may turn out to have causes in the other worlds. Perhaps the material world is indeed the creation of spirits, but if so, then presumably they made it because they need it for their own experience, evolution, development. The material world, if cut off from the spirit world, becomes meaningless and empty. So the material world needs the spirit world too. Ayahuasca and similar master plants appear to provide a direct means of communication with the spirit realm for sentient beings in the material world. The plants educate us by allowing us to experience in visions the reality of the supernatural, something normally impossible or very difficult for us to do as material-bound creatures. If I, with all the knowledge and rationalism of the 21st century at my disposal, could be so persuaded by the apparently supernatural realms and spirit beings that ayahuasca introduced me to, then what would our ancestors have thought if they had chanced upon similar hallucinogenic plants 30,000 years ago and seen similar wonders? What about the two elf-sized light beings I'd met? What would they have been taken to be in the Upper Paleolithic? What about the serpent transforming into a jaguar? What about the geometry and the architecture? Wouldn't it have all come together as a seamless otherworld? Not the way we tend to see such scenes now, as some sort of derangement of perception devalued by the modern idea of hallucinations, but as a veridical experience of another level of reality? January 24th. Don Francisco pours me a generous cupful of dense and rancid ayahuasca, which I almost throw up on the last swallow. The taste and smell are extremely strong, and for some reason I feel nervous and out of sorts this evening. There are waves of nausea, but I control them, breathe into them. I suppose that half an hour passes before the visions become strong. Tonight I see predominantly snakes, most of them about 3 or 4 feet in length. Again, the sense I get is that these are intelligent beings who mean us well, not harm. I experience none of the archetypal fear that snakes supposedly evoke. As usual, my eyes are closed, but I can see my legs and feet below me as though bathed in light. One of the serpents coils around my left calf and then rears its head up from knee level towards my face. Its body and head are colored a deep and brilliant gold. It seems to be inspecting or examining me, but I feel no fear. I meet a lot of these snakes coiling around the vegetation and around each other. They are everywhere, in the foreground and often the background of all my visions. There are patterns and lights. I see something that looks like a very large inverted bowl rising up into a purple sky glowing with light. I witness a complex series of transformations of snakes into felines. I have a sense of flying as though I am a bird, or riding on a bird, accompanied by 2 other birds. I go through what feel like long periods of intense introspection. Something in the ayahuasca leads me to examine my own moral failings and weaknesses in an utterly unsympathetic light, holds them up to my view and shows me how much and how many ways I am inadequate, venal, not good. In particular, I flagellate myself mercilessly about my father. Why wasn't I with him those last 5 days of his life? Why did I feel so driven to go back and finish my work? There are no excuses. Plain and simple, I should have been there and I wasn't. Several times I asked to see Dad's spirit, to meet him again and to talk to him, but this grace the Vine of Souls does not grant me. January 27th. The visions begin with 20 minutes of geometry, then suddenly I find myself looking at very close range into a shockingly alien face, gray in color, with a wide-toned forehead and a narrow-pointed chin, heart-shaped like the faces of the light beings I'd encountered a few days earlier. But this creature doesn't look friendly. Its eyes are multi-segmented like those of a fly. Frankly, it's the sort of image you'd expect to see adorning some far-fetched X-Files expose. And since aliens and ETs have never been interests of mine, I'm really puzzled to experience such hallucination. In the part of my mind that is still dealing with reasoning, I can already see the way that skeptics who have never taken ayahuasca are bound to read it. They must argue that there is no mystery in the appearance of entities like this in my hallucinations because, regardless of my lack of enthusiasm for aliens, my brain has had the opportunity to borrow such imagery from popular culture. Still, I feel unaccountably shaken and perplexed by what I've just seen. A short while later, out of a background of shifting geometrical patterns, a beautiful Egyptian goddess appears. I see only her head and headdress clearly. She is in full regalia. Then she vanishes as abruptly and mysteriously as she arrived. January 29th. Strange and terrifying, briefly terrifying, although it didn't start that way. I drink at 8:05 p.m. For the first half hour, as usual, nothing much happens. Just queasy and formless luminescences. Then I begin to see snakes. Not a lot and not spectacular. By 9:05, I'm feeling more intoxicated, dizzy, and nauseous. But still just snakes, not many. Mid-size. They're coiling and writhing around a bit more. I begin to wonder, foolish bravado, if this is all I'm going to get. The nausea increases, and the whole visionary experience ratchets up a notch and becomes more sinister. My eyes are closed throughout, but when I look up, the visions are up, and when I look down, they're down. I have the sense of gazing through a tunnel of vision with serpents coiled at the side of it, close to my eyes, threatening to fall on me. I throw up over the back of the bench I'm sitting on. As I shift position, the serpents shift with me. The visions stay strong while I'm vomiting. As I stop and return to the seated position, everything ratchets up another notch. The serpents morph into Chinese dragons with beards and long serpentine bodies. Serpents and serpentine dragons with beards and rows of teeth. It's as though a Chinese painting has come to life. And again, where did the ancient Chinese originally mine this imagery from, if not from the visionary world? I'm convinced it's not a matter of my vision being inspired by Chinese paintings, which I hardly ever think of. I'm getting a glimpse into the same visionary realm that inspired the Chinese artists, and countless other mythologies in which dragons feature. Then another upwards crank of the ratchet. The overall atmosphere, I can't explain why, is now distinctly terrifying and sinister. I see the gray, heart-shaped face of an alien again, but with an even stranger, harsher expression than before. And I see what could be spaceships, flying saucers, associated with this commanding, unpleasant alien presence. What's frightening is something that would be easy to interpret as an alien experience, the feeling that if I allow the vision to continue, I'm going to be taken up into those metal ships. They rotate and pulse with light from beneath, seeming to rise through a tube or funnel in the universe. I distinctly don't want to be taken and open my eyes to stop what I'm seeing, but the strangeness persists. I'm back in the real world, but just out of sight I can feel serpents, dragons, demonic aliens, and spaceships whirling all around. There's a sense in which the serpents, dragons morph into the alien who dominates this vision, and a sense in which the alien is different, not so much a serpent dragon as some sort of huge insect with humanoid features. I also see 4 or 5 other insect-like creatures associated with him. They seem more like workers, less intelligent or not intelligent, like giant ants in a way. These worker beings, they do seem to be working as a team on something, are about 3 feet high, I would guess. 2 other images, both of planets, stand out in my memory of this complex vision. In the first, the planet is immense and surrounded by rings or disks in the plane of its equator. In the second, I see a transparent Earth sphere with the fragility, texture, and glittering iridescent colors of a soap bubble. Etched on its surface are the outlines of the familiar continents, and I can see through them from one side to the other. The sphere is rotating and seems to float in space between 2 cupped hands. My final ayahuasca session in Peru is with a 74-year-old Shipobo Indian shaman named Don Leoncio and his tambo in the jungle beyond Iquitos. As well as the usual ingredients of Psychotria viridis leaves and a Banisteriopsis copy vine, his ayahuasca includes datura, another well-known visionary plant, and tastes unspeakably awful. I have a series of generally small and certainly not terrifying visions. There are a few snakes. Several times I see multiple rows of green pyramids laid out in long tapering strips. I seem to be flying over these strips. I also see a sphere, a cube, and a triangle, and rows of serpent or alligator mouths filled with teeth. But the single most memorable aspect of my visions this night unfolds over what feels like just a few seconds. I seem to be inside a large, quiet, dark room with an open doorway to one side. Light floods into the doorway, and through it I can see a beautiful, spacious balcony overlooking what is perhaps a vast river, or a lake, or even the sea. On the left side of the balcony, at the rear just outside the open doorway through which I'm looking, I suddenly become aware of the presence of a figure. It is an imposing statue about 6 feet high, and apparently carved in one piece from some green stone, perhaps jade. The sculptor provided excellent detailing of fine robes and a belt and something, possibly a sword, suspended from the belt. At first, this stunning piece of sculpture seems just that, a harmless, inanimate statue. I'm curious to see more of it and move my point of view a little closer to get a look at its face. To my surprise, the statue is half animal, half human. It has the body of a powerful and well-muscled man, but the head of a crocodile, like Sobek, the ancient Egyptian crocodile god. And now I suddenly realize it is alive, a living being, a supernatural guardian. At this moment, its eyes swivel sideways, and it is looking at me, taking note of me. The look is intelligent, appraising, somehow sly, but yet not threatening. What is this living statue, this being of jade? The vision fades. After leaving Peru, Santa and I flew to Brazil so that I could attend a session with the União de Vegetal, UDV, in the beautiful district of Ilha de Gurantiba, about 1 hour's drive west of the center of Rio de Janeiro. The mestre, master of the ceremony, is Antonio Francisco Fieri. He's a distinguished, intellectual-looking gentleman in his 60s with a gray mustache. Altogether, about 100 people attend. It is a family affair with age ranges present from babes in arms, young kids, teenagers, through to grandparents in their 70s. The UDV allows kids to drink ayahuasca, they call it their cha or tea, once a month from the age of 14, twice a month from age 18. This is demonstrably a preposterous middle-class group including many professionals such as doctors, lawyers, and architects. The temple is an especially dedicated villa overlooking magnificent countryside. It has a kitchen, a dining area, a patio, a large area to one side for cooking the ayahuasca, strictly Banisteriopsis copy, Psychotria viridis and water, and the temple itself, a large rectangular hall with space for congregations of 100 or more, all comfortably seated. What is striking is the extremely positive atmosphere of friendliness, support, rationality, and love among the congregation. For any Westerner used to strict drug prohibition, it is quite surprising to discover that these responsible, courteous people and families, all upright citizens, are gathered to take a powerful hallucinogen, and to do so as the basic sacrament of their own intensely philosophical religion. All wear a uniform for the session, representing their place in the hierarchy. The men wear white slacks and white shoes, the women wear orange slacks. All wear green, short-sleeved, button-up shirts. Entry rank is signaled by the white letters UDV on the left breast pocket. Counselors, the next rank, have the letters UDV and CDC in yellow on the breast pocket. Higher rank is indicated by gold stars. The top rank is the mestre, signaled by a blue shirt and a star. Visitors are allowed to wear civilian clothes. The cha is dispensed from a large glass urn placed at the head of the central table. The mestre decides how much each person gets, partly based on body weight, partly on other factors, past experience. The dispensing of the cha is done for the top ranks first. The mestre, then the counselors, then down through beginners, and finally visitors like me. We all line up to have our glasses filled, and wait until everyone is ready, then on a word from the mestre we all drink. The cha is watery and about the color of an overbrewed milky tea. The taste is, as usual, hideous, and at least 4 people exit to vomit straight away. The rest of us sit down. One of the counselors reads from several documents about the philosophy and founding of the UDV. Another counselor stands and clarifies certain points. A third counselor intones a hymn. The first hour is mainly passed in silence, reviewing our visions and thoughts, although occasionally a member of the congregation will raise a hand to ask a question which one of the counselors answers. Sometimes others elaborate. Later in the session, many members of the congregation, one by one, come to the table to stand and address the assembly. Some talk about their visions and thoughts during the session, others about some recent event or idea that has affected them deeply. It is all very earnest, genuine, spiritual, and philosophical. Sometimes CDs of haunting melodies are played. Sometimes the leading counselor intones hymns. The session runs from 9 p.m. until about 1:20 a.m. I drink my brew at 9:20 and am having good visions by 9:45. The first hour after drinking until 10:20 passes in what feels subjectively like an instant. My visions are familiar and positive, perhaps more brightly lit, less darkness visible than before. What I remember clearly are large snakes, again, light-colored boas, huge, coiling around each other and around branches. I also get pyramid shapes built around a lattice or framework of some kind. But the best part of the evening is when the same Egyptian goddess whom I saw last in Peru reappears, this time on the left side of my visual field. At first she is concealed in shadow. I look closely and see a slender female figure holding a dark blue mask in front of her face, one of those masks on a stick. Then she removes the mask and I see her face clearly in the instant before she vanishes once more. She glows the color of molten gold. If I were to nominate the single defining quality of the visions I experienced under the influence of ayahuasca, it would have to be the remarkable sense, no matter how otherworldly they were, of being real. It is surprising enough to encounter something so improbable as a light being, or an intelligent giant snake that transforms into a jaguar, or a hybrid crocodile man, or an insect man like my aliens, especially when any thought of such entities is normally very far from one's mind. But to encounter them in all their strangeness, yet bolstered by an unassailable aura of certainty and solidity, is doubly disturbing and disorienting. So some months before I met David Lewis Williams, what I had learned from personal experience in the Amazon had already begun to convince me of the force of his argument. If our ancestors in the Upper Paleolithic had consumed psychoactive plants, and we'll see that there was an excellent candidate available in Europe in the Ice Age that could have produced ayahuasca-like effects, then because we share the same neurology, it is safe to say that they would have had experiences rather like mine. Not in every minute detail, of course, just broadly and with something like the same general atmosphere. It had begun to seem highly plausible to me, as Lewis Williams suggests, that hallucinations could have given rise to early religious notions about supernatural realms and beings and the survival of death of the soul. Indeed, where else could our ancestors ever have acquainted themselves with such ideas in the first place, if not in the visionary realms where the shamans of all cultures and all periods have always made their spirit journeys? There, as I'd already found out for myself, hybrid man-beasts, light beings, transformations, and encounters with the deceased all become possible. Is the hard evidence for such encounters documenting the birth of religion really painted inside the deep caves of Upper Paleolithic Europe, as Lewis Williams claims? Author's note: I had not seen any of Pablo Amaringo's paintings before experiencing my own ayahuasca visions. That I was later able to find similarities to my visions in several works by the Peruvian shaman, reproduced in this chapter, is an illustration of the astonishing common imagery and identical parallel worlds that are reported by people from many different cultures who have experienced ayahuasca.
Science can explain everything if we look hard enough.
Shut up, science bitch.
Nothing is true. Everything is real.
Not only is he like ruining my life, but with all this God shit that he's into, he could be ruining my afterlife.
It's a sort of interdimensional vagina that somehow appears. I can interact with it.
fabric of the entire universe could be torn apart.
I know my mind is changing, but I'm already too far gone to know what to do.
Nothing is true. Nothing is true. Nothing is true.